Let's talk about delegation for just a moment. When you and I delegate, oftentimes communication is truly a key issue. For those of you today who either delegate cross or to colleagues, or those who delegate down, please be aware of the 5 most pertinent steps to delegation in the year 2009 and toward the future. The first step, you must identify the outcome and how you will evaluate it. In the past, we've defined the outcome. Without the ability to define how it will be evaluated, though, we don't have a completeness of understanding. If I'm working with Marshall, and Marshall I say, this is the outcome I want, we still have the possibility of defining it differently. By saying, this is the outcome I want, and this is how I know that we've done the process, then we should be on a more similar or common page. The second part of delegation in a communication process is then you introduce the 3 major constraints. Every delegation process has 3 major constraints. The first may not be applicable directly to you, but it is. What's the budget or financial commitment to this process? In other words, if I delegate to you, how much can you spend? Maybe your project does not have a budget, maybe it does, but it's the first. The second constraint we must always communicate. What's the time constraint of this project? When I define time constraints, I'm not speaking only of the deadline. I'm speaking of the deadline and how much time can be invested in achieving it. If you've ever delegated, you've probably had the situation where I delegate to you, and it becomes an exciting project for you, and you forget everything else you're supposed to be doing, and place all your time in on this process. And 2 weeks go by, and I check in, and you're doing great on the delegation, but the normal day-to-day activities have stopped. I think it's appropriate that we communicate this should take approximately 12 hours over the next 3 weeks. That way we give a frame of reference so people know what we're anticipating as a time commitment. Without that time commitment, we're not being fully communicative. The third constraint, other people's time, OPT. You must inform the person you're delegating to whether they can involve other people, and if so, how much of other people's time can they be involved? Delegation today is an important aspect in the retention and continued service of the people we work with. Old school delegation was the process of giving up actions that were minor to those as a way of throwing them a bone and part of their maturation process. New school delegation is this. We're developing our staff. We're expanding their abilities. With that consideration, many times we need to have other people involved, because Shannon, if you and I are working together, and I think that you are apt to get a promotion in the next year, and part of my responsibility is to develop you on how to manage other individuals, I may give you a project where you are delegated to get this done. By the way, involve 3 other people of your choice, as long as this much time is not expended, more than this much time is expended, and the normal day-to-day activities get done. What that does, it allows Shannon to practice the acquisition of team members, motivation of team members, follow through with team members, and an understanding of the time commitments. 3 constraints: time, money, other people's time. Third, and probably the most key part of this communication from a persuasive process, is to make sure that we are on the same page as we move forward. The comment I would ask that you use would be this. Based on what I've explained so far, what is the first step you'll take, and when will you take it? Based on what I've said so far, when's the first action you'll take, and when will you take it? Ladies and gentlemen, we used to do this, and some of you will recognize this. I delegate a process to you, and then I say magically, do you understand? Now, if I'm the direct report, and I look at someone who's trying to impress me, and I say, do you understand? What's the default answer? Yes. Yes. Yeah, you get that nodding of the head. Oh yeah, I'm with you. I've got it all the way. Yeah, yeah, that's really good. 3 weeks later, we check in, and we realize they didn't understand anything of what we communicated. By asking what the first action is, if they get the first action right, they probably have a more thorough understanding. They get the first action wrong, then you and I know there's a communication issue where I may either need to persuade to a path, learn an alternate, or redefine the process. And when we redefine the process, we need to make it our error, not theirs. Because we're developing staff today, not challenging staff. As part of our delegation, it's going to be, I see how that could be an option. Although I don't believe it contributes to the direction I'm going, please bear with me a second. I need to redefine the problem for you. Does that make sense for most of us? Our goal should be knowing what they're going to do first. And the reason we want to know when they're going to do it, because it gives us an idea as to when we should check up or follow up. And that's the fourth step of delegation today. Do follow up. See, the difference in our world between delegation of the last century and delegation of this century is simply this. Delegation of last century was about challenge. Delegation of this century is about development. Now, without going into great detail today, let me give you a few ideas. When I look at last generation, or last century style delegation, it was processed toward those of you in the room that are boomers and builders. That would be those individuals born prior to 1964. We lived, and I am a boomer by the way, we lived in a world of challenge and competition. The reason we lived in a challenge and competition world is based on the finite resources that were available. Now, you may not share this experience, but a lot of my generation did. That when you went out for baseball, there was a cup. They did not create a second team. There was a cup. When you and I went to college, there were probably 3 to 4 students in for every desirable seat in every desirable college. And there was a cup. That doesn't mean you couldn't go to college. It meant that your first choice may not be your received choice. When we went into the workplace, there were probably at least 3 other individuals qualified for the job we received. And management learned to use challenge as a means of influence. That it was easier for them to sit down a challenge, judge whether you met it, and then infer that there are other people who would give whatever for your job. If you could make the cut, outstanding. If you couldn't, we'll find somebody else. Does this resonate with anybody in the room?
Yes.
All right. Now see, old school delegation, it was all about challenge. I'm going to throw down the gauntlet, and if you can live up to it, then Larry, we're going to be in good shape. New school delegation. Now, before I go to new school, those of you who are my age or older, and I turned 50 this year, just to let you know, we have to realize nature has played a tragic joke on us. You see, the world's changed. It's not about coddling. It's not about everybody gets a trophy. It's not about all the other things you want to talk about. It's about competition. You see, in our world, we competed for finite resources. And now that we're at the age where we could drive that, we're still competing for finite resources. Because truly, there are only 6 to 7 qualified individuals for every job that are available. So now instead of challenging people, judging them, we have to attract people and develop them. So just when you and I get to the age where we could do to those like it was done to us, the rules changed, and we're now competing for other individuals. And that's why new delegation happens. New style delegation states, it's our job to develop and make successful those people we want to work with most often. I can tell you, and I'm not a Gen X or a Gen Y, but I can tell you through study that Gen X and Gen Y wants to develop a portfolio of skills. They want to be involved. They want to be contributing. And they do not recognize time at seat. Whether you've been here 20 years or you've been here 2, an idea is an idea. Is that fair to say, Gen X and Gen Y? In fact, for many Gen X and Gen Y, the way they look at it is, if you've been in the same job for 10 years, what's wrong with you? Where those of us who are the older we recognize the tenure process.